The voting is now underway for the March 3rd primaries. With the number of high-profile races on the ballot, Texas election officials are expecting a good turnout during this primary election. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brennan Gurley. And just a few moments ago, several polling locations closed for the first day. Let's head on over to CBS 19's Nayeli Creo to get a check on the turnout and what's going to be on your ballot.
Early voting started earlier today, and here at the Gregg County Elections Office, voters have been coming quickly in and out, helping decide on several local and state races, and also coming out with some of these. Early voting runs through February 27th, giving voters plenty of opportunity to cast their ballot before Election Day on March 3rd. So far, election officials say turnout has been steady, with hundreds of voters casting ballots on day one. In both Gregg and Smith counties, officials recommend not waiting until the last minute and making sure you're prepared when you arrive.
A lot of people just have this kind of tradition of, I want to vote on Election Day, which is fine. They can have that tradition. But here's what I like to say. What if you had a flat tire? What if something happened, if you had an emergency in your family and you could not vote that day? You're over. It's done. You can't vote anymore.
Briggs says primary turnout is typically lower than the November general election, but these races are still important. Primary voters will narrow down the candidates who will go head-to-head in November. Officials remind voters to also bring a valid photo ID and to check voting locations and hours before heading out. Weekend voting hours are also available for those that might need that flexibility. To know who's running in the Democratic and Republican primaries here in East Texas, just text the word VOTE to 903-600-2600 and we'll send our voter guide straight to your phone. In Longview, I'm Nayeli Carrillo.
And to help us break down what early voting can mean for the U.S. Senate race and what the numbers might tell us about the general election, joining us now is political science expert Dr. John Barrett. Dr. Barrett, thanks for joining us. First off, Dr. Barrett, how much can these early ballots actually tell us about which way the Senate race might go?
Well, they won't tell us a lot. You have to really kind of squint your eyes and look at the tea leaves. But one of the things that'll be interesting is to see what kind of turnout we're getting, particularly in Hispanic areas. Now, that may not have a big impact on the primary round, but it may give us some indication of how the general election is going to go because, judging from some other races we've had, there's been a big shift among the Hispanic population and their attitudes towards Republicans. So that's one thing to look for.
And all eyes on the U.S. Senate race, Dr. Barrett. Senator Cornyn has emphasized Paxton's past controversies as preparing for a potential runoff. How did those dynamics play into voter decision making?
Well, we're really seeing a difference of style here more than substance, both on the Republican and the Democratic side. And so, one of the things that we're going to gauge through this is, are the primary voters kind of in a fighting mood and they want more of a hard edge on their candidates, or are they more concerned about electability? That traditionally hasn't been a big concern for Republicans because they've easily won statewide office, since the 90s. So I'm not sure that's going to be really top of mind for a lot of Republicans.
And on the Democratic side, Jasmine Crockett is currently leading James Tallarico in the polls. What factors could shift this race in the final days of early voting?
Well, Tallarico has more money on hand, and so I suspect that you're going to see, him use some of that powder he's been keeping dry, so that might be a factor there. And again, you really have to see who turns out to vote. It's usually the most hardcore supporters of the party that populate the primary voters, and so we just have to see, again, which kind of mood they're in.
And with several high-profile statewide races happening at the same time, how might those influences turn out in the Senate race specifically?
Well, I definitely think it's going to drive voter turnout. We've got an unusual situation where there's both a high-profile contest on the Republican side and the Democratic side. And so there's been a little something for everybody to kind of sink their teeth into here. And so I think that'll kind of grab voters and drive more to the polls than you usually see. And then we'll see, how that pans out for the general election.
And Dr. Barrett, final question for you. What should viewers at home really be paying attention to over the next several days?
Well, I think that the thing to look for, again, is any indications of high voter turnout. There's this theory that if the voter turnout is high enough, it's bad news for the Republicans. Usually that doesn't pan out, but that's one thing that you can take a look at and see.
Alrighty, Dr. John Barrett, thank you for your time.